collectively the group will kind of have to fill in a lot of the details. But so the three guys, they worked for a different betting company, American Betting Company. Yeah, American Bet. And Paul and Harry were working in. They were in New York City, and Steve was in Houston, and they started showing up at their stores, and things had kind of gotten a little funky for a little bit. Like they were getting a weird vibe from like landlords showing up to collect money that hadn't been paid and rent and whatever. So, and they were young. They were 24, 25, right? 25, 26, something like that. Mid-20s at the time. And they were all college buddies. And I think it was Paul had showed up at his store one day, and the doors were locked. They were chained closed, and he was sort of said, "Oh poop, this isn't good." So he went over to Harry's store, and they started. The way that Paul tells the story, they started talking about, that they could do this. We could do this. We could start a business like this. And started trying to determine, how much money it would take to do that, and they sort of came up with this number that they could do it for about $15,000. They could start something. They could have their own store for about $15,000. And they were talking about this, and in the middle of their conversation, the phone rings, and it's Steve, who was working in the sort of accounting side for the business, right?
Yes. He had been made the chief accounting controller guy, out of controller, as he described it. And when Finney showed up on the job, he said, "Where are the books?" And they said, "There are no books. The last guy burned them." And so he had to reconstruct, the books from whatever was left over. So they realized that things weren't so good.
So the phone rings, and it's Steve on the other end. And the first thing he says to Harry, who answered the phone, is, "This thing's going down, it's going under." And Harry said, "I know, we were just talking about that." And then the next thing he said to Harry was, "But we could do this. We could do this ourselves." And Harry said, "I know, Paul and I were just talking about that." And Steve sort of asked, how much do you think it would take? And Harry had already committed to putting in $10,000, and Paul had committed to the $5,000. So when Steve asked Harry how much he thought it would take, Harry's answer was, "Well, it'll take $15,000, and Paul's got $5,000, and I got $5,000 if you got $5,000." So Harry saved half of his investment by doing that, and got Steve Fendrick involved as well. So the three of them pooled their $15,000, and they came to Houston, and they somehow secured a lease store formerly known as Kinda Crazy. I don't even know what Kinda Crazy sold, but they had a sign out front that said Kinda Crazy. Yeah.
Crazy merchandise. Yes.
Yeah, 2Ks, Kinda Crazy.
Abby shopped there all the time.
Abby shopped there a lot. Yep. And they. It was probably a tiny store. I think the way that they tell the story is it was, 1,800, 2,000 square feet, something like that. Just big enough basically to have, if you look in the pictures, beds on either side of the room with an aisle down the middle, and you could pretty much roll from one mattress to the next. And what was really innovative was that they were one of the first specialty stores that they put the beds on the floor without plastic on them, which was like a really big sort of deal because they were selling that inventory. I mean, they were buying it on a credit card or however, but they would take it out of the bag so that you could really try it. You could really feel the bed, and that was like really innovative in 1986. So they had their one store. We opened on July 4th, 1986, and sort of then it kind of took off from there.
And the desk that they painted with acrylic paint, and it didn't dry for like 3 weeks. So every time they wrote an order or whatever, it was like on wet paint on the acrylic desk, and so that's the desk that they had to work with.
And if you look at any of the pictures, Paul is always doing all of the like just grunt work, and Harry and Steve are always sort of in the background smiling. Like we're the idea guys, but we're not the, yeah.
It's really short shorts.
And they all, yes, and Paul had the shortest shorts, and Steve had the coolest 86 hairstyle you've ever seen. It was, oh my goodness, yeah. Long in the back and sort of stood up on top. He looked like a movie star or something. And Harry had hair. Yeah.
And short shorts, Bender?
And short shorts. They all wore short shorts, yes. And one of my favorite photos of all that, they do this presentation in ground school a lot for our new associates, and I think one of the coolest pictures that they have incorporated into that presentation, because they all are back and work for the company, and they've had their own sort of journey, but they're all back working with Mattress Firm, and one of the coolest pictures is the three of them sitting around in one of their apartments, or they may have all sort of lived together, I'm not 100% sure, but in an apartment. Their furniture is all pool furniture, like the white tube with the white plastic, whatever. Yeah. It's all pool furniture because they didn't have any money to buy furniture, so they borrowed pool furniture from the swimming pool in their apartment complex and brought it up to their apartment, and that's what they're sitting around a typewriter writing the business plan for Mattress Firm and the core values and all that, and Paul still has a copy of that, the original sort of paper that they typed that on.
Where are those guys now?
They're all, Fenny is our chief strategy officer. Paul actually works in franchising for us. And Harry actually is involved in a couple different franchises and then works in our franchising department as well. Yep. And then there was a fourth, Charlie Roberts, who they all three of them will attribute to. They really all say he was the brains of the whole outfit. He wasn't really an owner, but he's Harry's brother, and he was more sort of wise in the ways of business, and he kind of came in and helped them along the way.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, cool.
he was the fifth Beatle.
Yeah.
Incidentally, we still have a store at Southwest Freeway in that center where the first store was. We've moved out to an out parcel, but the corner of that building where our Southwest Freeway store is where the first store was. And it, as Corey mentioned, it was a very small store, but one of the things, just to show how serendipitous any business success is, that happened was the space next to them wasn't leased, and I don't know if it was about 87, maybe a year in, there was a hurricane that was supposed to hit Houston, and they went to ask the landlord if they could just, expecting, that maybe there would be flooding and they could put, would have, higher demand, if they could rent the space next to them, and the guy gave it to them for a song, and put beds in there just for storage in the retail space next to them. Well, as they put beds in there, they were like, well, this is bigger than the other store. Why don't we just set up the store here and see if with the more square footage we can do business while we got it. And the hurricane never came, but because they had the bigger store footprint, the business doubled in size.